am a lawyer, but I am not necessarily your lawyer. The materials discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be deemed legal advice. If you have a specific legal question according to your circumstances, then I encourage you to speak with an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. Welcome back to another edition of Ag Law Today. We've got TJ Curtin in the house. We're talking all things farm, estate, and succession planning, what to do and what to not to do. So TJ, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners? Tell us who you are, where you are, and your association with agriculture.
Yes, thanks for having me, Cari. Like I said, my name's TJ Curtin. We live on a farm just a couple miles west of Blue Mound, Illinois, just kind of right in the heart of central Illinois. Raise corn and soybeans and Angus cattle, and been doing this for, graduated from college just a little over 20 years ago. So I've been doing this for quite a while. I've got a wife named Megan. We've been married, gonna be 19 years this year, and then got 4 kids, 15, 13, 12, and 9. Audrey, Will, Patrick, and Nora, all in school at Taylorville's, where kids go to school. That's where I graduated from high school as well. So yeah, just kind of had, probably somewhat of the reason why I'm here on the podcast, kind of had a interesting farming career to this point. And, but I'm still right here farming where, my wife and I have lived here since 2005. So we've had a few bumps in the road, but we're still here farming.
So if we could back up and just sort of talk about the landscape of your family's business, like who is really involved, what are the different aspects, and what are the roles that people play now? And then maybe we can talk a little bit about how you got there.
Okay. Well, right now, present day, I've been farming somewhat, I don't know how you label the official term, but I'm farming with a neighbor who I am not related to. He's it's got a moderate sized farm for our area. I would say it's certainly not a big farm, but it's not a small farm. And he's corn and soybeans only. And he's getting close to the point of wanting to slow down and maybe not fully retire, but definitely slow down as far as the day-to-day operations. So I've been with him for in March will be 2 years. So I've actually put in and taken out 2 full crops with him, and we're getting ready to start the 3rd growing season with him. Again, just a neighboring farmer that I'm not related to. So as far as my family, I don't have any family farming with me. It's just myself, and then I'm farming with this neighboring farmer. And that's how I am right now farming. But up to this point, it wasn't that. It was something different.
Okay, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And in your current situation, are you in a business partnership with your neighbor, or is it more of an employee-employer relationship?
Yeah, so I would define our relationship right now as employer-employee. He pays me a salary. And but he does rent me some ground, and as the years go by, the process is to rent a little more ground and things like that, and that's what we're going to do. But right now, that's where we're at. I basically come and do work on the day-to-day basis, and he rents me some of his ground, and that's where we're at right now in the 2 years that I've been with him.
Now, you previously noted that you were previously working with your family enterprise. And so can you tell us a little bit about what things look like at that point in time?
Yes. And I graduated from the U of I in May of 2000. And, there was just, I guess I was one of for me in my life, there was never any doubt I was going to come home to the farm, and they wanted me to at that time. So at that time in May of 2000, our farm was, my grandfather John was really at that point almost retired. He was active politically, and he was on a lot of local boards and other kind of boards with cattle and local politics. And he was in his mid to late 60s at that time and was really wanting to take a step back. And so when I came home from college, I filled that void, and he more or less kind of retired from doing much day-to-day work on the farm. And so at that time, it was my dad and Fred and my uncle Jim and me. We operated the family farm with, and then Grandpa was lived on the farm and was around, but wasn't doing much of the work. And
I'm going to
yeah.
ask you a similar question that I asked before about your relationship with your neighbor. So at that point in time, was there any kind of partnership agreement among you and your family members?
No, no, and that's probably, we got started off on not the greatest foot. And you know um I just wanted to farm, and I wasn't worried about those things at that time. I was in my early 20s. I had a good time in college, but I was glad to be done and be working on the farm with cattle and in the farming, and that's what I wanted to do. I was ready just to hit the ground running. And to be honest, I knew that they certainly weren't paying me a tremendous amount of money, but at that time in my life, I didn't really care. I was just glad to be farming. And so we never had those conversations. And that's part of what I'll say today, is that you need to. I mean, we never did on our. I just came to the farm and they said, well, this is what we're going to pay you, and let's just go. At that time, the partnership was my dad and my uncle were 50-50 partners, and my grandpa they'd kind of bought him out, or were buying him out. So I was an employee. I was an employee. And basically it was a big deal around our farm that I never quite understood it, but because I've always worked there in the summers throughout my whole life, and then when I wasn't playing basketball or something, I helped out. But I had to pay my dues. We gotta, you just gotta come here and work and pay your dues, and then we'll figure something out. That was basically always the thought process. And as years went down the road, and there was no plan, and nothing ever changed, and it definitely created problems with all three of us.
Mm-hmm. So talk to me about that. So you come home from college, you're working on the family farm essentially as an employee, right? And how long did that sort of status quo go forward until there started to become some issues?
Yeah, it's just kind of funny when I think back on how many years I let it go and didn't push harder. But and you got to keep in mind, during some of these years, I mean, we were a pretty sizable farm, and we were one of the bigger farmers in the area, and we had a lot of cattle. And then about 2005, 2006, my dad added a trucking company, and so we were. One thing people, you got to keep in mind is we were busy, and we were always had stuff going on. And so that's where time goes by and you don't want to rock the boat because you're always so busy. So, to answer your question, and I got married and we started having kids, and I worked at the farm for 11 years before I finally went to my dad in 2000, the summer of 2011, and I said, Dad, we've kind of broached some of these subjects before, and we never really got anywhere with them. But I'm going to tell you, at this point, I had 3 kids and been married almost 10 years. I just said I don't know where my future is here. It doesn't look like anything's going to change. And I flat out do not make enough money to support my family. I don't want to leave the farm, but I can no longer work here. So I'm just letting you know that whenever I find a job that's suitable to me that, pays enough, I'm leaving. And I finally just laid, 11 years. I mean, I finally laid it out to him. I because there had been squabbles here and there, and I said, hey, I need to know what I'm doing, and he always said, well, you need to rent some of your own ground, or well, you need to do this, but yet whenever I would do those things, it all just became the farms, and then you need a set of tires on your car, take them down, and the farm will buy your tire. I mean, it was just stuff like that, but never anything concrete, or never anything, okay, TJ, here's what we're going to do, or here you need to for you to buy in, this is how much we need for you to buy in. It was none of those discussions. Or if I did rent some ground, and then he would just put it in the farm's name, and then give me a little bonus and say, well, this is about what your bonus can be here. And so I never really got, it was nothing concrete, it was nothing in writing. I was still an employee, not making, certainly not making hardly enough to support our family. And that's not the way my grandpa did it with my dad and my uncle. And all I ever would say is, I just want the same opportunity you guys got. And there was just, we could never get there. They kept putting it off. And so to answer your question, finally, after 11 years, I said, this is, I got to know where I'm at, or I am leaving. And I said, I'm not going to yell, and we're not going to have a fight about it. I'm just telling you. And then at that point, he said, well, what, my uncle did not like the cattle. I mean, it wasn't his thing. And he says, well, why don't you and I buy your uncle out of the cattle operation, and then you and I will be full partners in the cattle operation. We'll put the ground that you got the relationships on into the partnership, and then I will put some ground into the partnership, some farm ground. And then that way, we can farm some ground in that partnership, him and I, me and my dad, and then you and I will own all the cattle and the cattle equipment, etc. So then that's finally, we did that starting, January 1, 2012, that Curtin Land and Cattle LLC started. And that was an offshoot of our other farm, was named Bluestone Farms. That was my dad and uncle's partnership. And so then that was the start of that. And then, I got a little bit of control over what we were doing, and I got to know a little bit about the finances, because prior to that, the finances of our farm was state kept secret. I mean, Dad did not talk about anything. I had no idea, all this, you just didn't talk about it, and you didn't want to tell me anything. So at that point, after 12 years of farming, I finally got to get my, boots on the ground and actually own a little bit and learn a little bit about the ins and outs of farming from the financial perspective.
Did your dad also have a partnership with his brother, your uncle, at the time?
Yeah, and that was Bluestone Farms. So they had Bluestone Farms, and that was their partnership. And then the other thing he had done in the mid to late 2000s is they started a trucking company, Bluestone Farms Trucking. And then they had about 10 to 12 trucks. It just depended. They sold some, bought some. Sometimes they had a bunch of drivers, and sometimes they didn't. So then that was also, so they had two LLCs, or two partnerships. And then we had, Dad and I had ours, which is the cattle. So we had, my dad was a half owner in all three of the partnerships. My uncle was half owner in two of them, and then I was half owner in one of them. And at the start, I think we all thought that would be great, and it would solve all of our problems, and we could all go along in harmony, and it didn't work out at all. And I certainly wouldn't recommend that arrangement to anyone. It didn't work out, and and it, created an avenue for a lot of misdeeds to occur without other people knowing. So, needless to say, so anyway, that lasted till about 2018, and then the wheels really fell off.
Okay.
And so then that's when things didn't work.
But for 6 years, it sounds like you guys operated under this business structure. Does that sound right?
Well, it worked for 4 years, and then my dad and my uncle did, things were disintegrating there, and so in 2016, my dad and uncle decided to quit farming together. So then that was the first big split. So then they had a big sale and sold everything, and basically my dad wanted it all, and there was a lot of legal battles in between, but at the end of the day, if about a year there was tons of legal issues, and then so in 2015 was when they decided we are not going to farm together anymore. So this went on for a year, a lot of legal stuff, and nothing was resolved. And then in March of 2016 they had a sale, which essentially my dad bought everything back, and so then he started farming on his own, but then brought a brother of mine in who had no experience at all farming and never helped us ever. Just, he brought him in and kind of made him his partner. And so then we went forward with a new partner under kind of the same arrangements, and the same problems kept going. It's just a new person now. So that didn't work either. And then in 2018 was when another, I guess you could say, bomb went off. That the new arrangement didn't work either. And so then in March of 2019, we sold out Curtin Land and Cattle, part of the farm. And then that's when I said, enough's enough. I am not continuing farming with my family anymore. It obviously has not worked. I put in 19 years of my life. I tried my best. I would have, I couldn't have tried any harder, and I wanted to make it work. And it was obvious that it was, my dad and I certainly didn't see things the same way. So I got out. We sold Curtin Land and Cattle, and I was on my own.
So TJ, I feel like this is a little bit of a podcast of how to in reverse, because your story is sort of a story of like where things went wrong, right?
Yeah, yes.
And so do you look backwards and think to yourself, like, where could the redirect have happened to have changed the course of how things developed?
Yes. For me, I think there would have been troubles, and not to get into all that, but I think my dad and I would have always had troubles just because of kind of the way he is. But I think we may have made it to work as if from right at the beginning, I would have just set up my own farm, and I could have still been just like I am with my neighbor now. I could have still been Bluestone's employee, which is my dad and my uncle's farm. I could have still been their employee. And then as I should have, I could have bought some cattle. I could, I did rent some ground, and I would have had it in my umbrella. And then I could have paid the farm a custom farming rate for my acres. And then I would have had my own crops to market, and I could have bought my seed, and I could have known, what I was doing, and I couldn't have, that way I wouldn't have had to worry about other people, ended up, the buck would have stopped with me, which is before this whole thing blew up. I mean, there was just a lot of things going on that my dad was doing that I did not know. And then once I found out, it was, to say the horses let out of the barn, is an understatement. I mean, by the time I find out the scope of everything that was going on, it was a snowball I couldn't stop. So my recommendation for me in my situation would have been back to just started my own operation by myself, and then growing it from there. And that way, if something went awry, I could have a lot more easily extracted myself.
So in other words, you would have had your own business enterprise while working with your family business. Does that sound
Yeah.
accurate?
Yes. Yes. And I know a lot of my neighbors do that too. Obviously there's a lot of sons who come back to the farm, and a lot of, some of them do join the family partnership. I don't, I'm sure everyone's a little different, but they do go ahead and just join that family partnership entity. But there is a lot of sons who, hey, the dad farms, and he's got his acres, and then the son comes home and kind of works for their dad, but sets up his own farm. And then as the son starts renting some ground, then that's his. And then they kind of share equipment. I mean, I know, and then as the son creates, makes some more money and gets some more equity, the son might buy some equipment, and they kind of share it. And that's how, we should have done ours. I think that would have worked the best in our operation. It would have, that way I know what I've got. I know my finances. And yeah, I think that for our particular operation, I think that if I were to go back, that would have worked.
But TJ, go back to the TJ that was 20 years old, 21 years old, 22 years. How does a college kid basically be able to have that a forethought of like, okay, this is what I need to do? I mean, what advice would you give to people who are sitting in a chair right now at the University of Illinois or Purdue or some other school right now, wanting to go back to their family farm? I mean, how should they be thinking about things?
That's a great question. And that's part of what got me in trouble. I wasn't worried about it. I thought, my family has farmed in this area for almost 100 years. I mean, and we're very successful, and there's a lot of Curtins who farm. And I thought, well, why would I be any different? I mean, I thought, I wasn't worried about it. I thought everything would be fine and it would work out just like it always has. I guess my advice would be, so I tried to kind of either be a part of Bluestone Farms or somehow set up my own farming operation, and it was always met with excuses. Oh yeah, we'll work on that this winter. Oh, we're really busy right now, TJ. Yeah, I understand. We'll work on that later. Or, well, I don't know. It's prices are really high right now. Now's not the time you want to be buying in. Or then, well, prices are really low right now. Now it's not a great time. So my advice would be, when you're met with some resistance, I would, before you get in too deep, and before you like me, I was married and then had kids, and they kind of had me. I mean, I didn't want to make a big career change. We lived on the farm. I mean, we live on the home place. And so it's like, what am I supposed to do? I live here. I'd say, when you come home to the farm, if you've been there, I wouldn't give it more than a year. I mean, I would say if you've been there a year and you can't have that conversation, I know people, don't like ultimatums, but I would give one. I'd say, hey, we got to figure out where I'm at in this operation, and a map, a roadmap, a plan, something, or I'm going to go. And that's advice I would give, because years went by and I kept getting excuses, or, hey, oh yeah, we need to talk about that later. Oh yeah, we'll get you, we'll figure something out this winter. And 10 years in, I was like, 10 years in, got 3 kids, I live on the home place. And I was just still an employee and had no idea where we were going. And all this time I helped the farm grow too. I mean, our farm grew tremendously after Grandpa retired. My grandpa was a very conservative guy. My dad is the polar opposite of that. He's very aggressive. So our farm grew exponentially, and I couldn't get a piece of the pie at all. And I just thought, 10 years in, I helped grow this thing too. I mean, what are we doing here? But 10 years, that's too long. You shouldn't have to wait that long. But I was trying to get along and, pay my dues. And, well, well, we'll figure it out next year, those things. And it's like, then you wake up one day and it's like, I've been here 10 years and I don't know where I'm at here.
Yeah, life goes so quickly. So I feel like every time I talk to folks about estate planning and succession planning and all the things, invariably um, having that conversation comes up over and over and over again. But you and I both know that in farm families, a lot of farm families, that's not so easy. And so I guess to your point, when now looking backwards, what do you think that you should have done to help make sure that those conversations happen early and often?
I don't know. Looking back, I'm not sure. Um, the one problem with our farm was we were so close in age. My mom and dad were teenagers when I was born, so they weren't that much older than me. And then when just my dad was in his early 40s when I came home from college, and my grandpa just retired, so it was the first time in my dad's life he got to be boss. And then my uncle is only 10 years older than me, and it was he was kind of first time really hitting the ground going too, and he had a young family at that time. And so I think both of those guys thought, well, we're just finally being in charge now. We're going to try to make some money ourselves, and without the Grandpa telling us no, which Grandpa told us all no a lot, and then and so I don't know how it would have happened. I don't know what I would have had to have done back then. It was, my grandpa was around, and nobody challenged him. I mean, and he wasn't easy to talk to about those things. So I don't know what I could have done differently. I suppose if I held my ground really firm and really created a lot of trouble, maybe we would have done something. But at that time in my life, at my age, again, like I said before, I was a single guy. I was making enough money to support myself, and I was just gonna, oh, we'll worry about it later. And then probably at the time we could, Grandpa moved to town in 2005. I'd been farming 5 years, and so then me and my wife moved here to the home place where the farm headquarters was, and that was 5 years in. I lived at the home place. Honestly, and I was so excited to be here because I took care of the cattle, and I was just so excited to be at the same place where the cattle were, for calving purposes. And then if I wanted to work on them after hours, I could. And but that time, that's probably when I should have said, hey, look, I'm making a pretty big commitment to the farm here. I've bought the home place house, and my wife and I are moving here to the farm. I need to know where I'm standing. And that's probably, at that time, I probably should have put my, foot in the ground and said, look, guys, we got to have a serious discussion right now.
Mhm. That makes a lot of sense. So do you think that there could have been things along the way that could have happened just in terms of you getting more education about the accounting of the farm business? I mean, I think it was interesting, but you're not alone in this on how blind you felt about the farm finances, as a person who had effectively grown up on that farm and had been an employee for more than a decade of your life.
Yes, and 100%. And that was something I didn't shy away from. I did tell my dad, I wanted to learn how to market grain. I wanted to learn, the timing of input purchases. I mean, how do you figure when you want to buy your seed corn and your fertilizer? And but that was never, that was absolutely not going to happen. I mean, he had a firm grip on that. But I think you need to, okay, so with this guy I'm farming with now, I mean, he rents me X number of acres. I'm in charge. I mean, I buy the inputs. I decide what we're putting on. I decide what seed corn we're buying, and I market the grain. I mean, this guy gave that responsibility to me right off the bat. Why couldn't my dad done that 20 years ago, 22 years ago? There was no reason. I mean, and that's what I would say to farm families, fathers or grandfathers. You know, you've got to start showing this next generation, be honest with you, as soon as possible, how these things work. And it would have shed a big light on to me on there was some things I didn't know and I didn't realize, but how could I have known? And now that I'm, finally doing it with my neighbor, I mean, it's really, um, opened my eyes to a lot of things. And honestly, it's, um, what happened to our family should have never happened. But, I think that just the fact that my dad was the only one who knew the finances, there was no one there to sound an alarm or say, hey, whoa, what's this? Or whoa, yeah, we got to figure some things out, because when, things went awry, it by the time my uncle and then me found out about it, it was way too late, and there was really nothing we could do at that point. And so that's the other part. It's just when you just have one person, having the financial hold of the farm, when they start making really bad decisions, there's no one there to sound an alarm. I mean, we had no idea.
So you are a father of, you have 3 kids?
Four.
4. Oh my goodness, it's like 100 kids. So what are your plans for passing down your farming enterprise, or how are you going to make corrective measures now, when it comes to your kids?
Well, so far, it kind of looks like, I have 4 children, and I know they're young, but right now it seems to be I have one child, my 13-year-old son, who is just ate up with farming. I mean, it's all he thinks about. He loves it. He has it in his blood. I mean, everything that I had. And so the other 3, my oldest daughter is very interested too, and I'm not sure, she'll come back and work on the farm, but she'll always have a part of it. But then my son, I mean, he wants to work on it. He wants to be a farmer. There's no doubt. And we've already told him, I went to the Lakeland College and then U of I with already pretty much the knowledge that I'm just coming home to the farm. So I was an animal science major because I really like the cattle. And if I were to go do that back again, I would take animal science classes, but I would probably take another major to where if the farming thing didn't work out, I could have gotten a job easier. So with that being said, I've told my son, you hopefully there's a spot for you on the farm, and I'm going to try to do everything I can to be able to bring him back. But if there's not, you have got to go to college and get a skill or get a degree in which you can have off-farm employment. That's not negotiable with us. And we've told him that. And that's the big change I would say is like, you've got to almost pretend like I can't come back to the farm. You got to go get a skill or a degree in which you can find employment that, just in case the farming thing isn't viable. And so that's the big thing that we're doing with our kids. That, with me, like I said, I went to my freshman year of college. I mean, I knew that in 4 years, I was coming home to the farm. There was just no doubt about it.
That makes a lot of sense. So, any other words of advice for our listeners, just as it applies to succession planning and estate planning?
However difficult they may be, you owe it to each other. Let's just say each other. I mean, to have those conversations, because, my family is, not the same. I mean, we went through some things that no family should have to go through. And, basically it was just because, 15 years prior or 20 years prior, we never had conversations. And then things fester and more things build up. And then you add in some outside influences there, doing their thing, and you've got a bomb that goes off. So, my advice would be is, if you've got a child that wants to come back to the farm, you want to put them under a trial period, fine, but define that trial period. Say, all right, we're going to put in and take out a crop together and see if you like it, because planting season is stressful. Harvest is very stressful. And if we all decide after that, hey, everything worked well, we want to keep working together, then you need to have a plan, and you need to say, all right, this is how we're going to work you in, or here's a roadmap to where, where we want you to be, and what do you think? Where do you want to be? I mean, how long, and maybe some people want to be an employee maybe some people do just want to be an employee. Other people, want to be part of the business. I think either way, you have got to have a conversation and get everyone on the same page, period.
That's great advice. TJ, I so appreciate you coming to the podcast and sharing your story with our listeners. So just really appreciate your time.
Yes, anytime, Cari. It's good to talk to you.